today is the personal statement and applications workshop that I am offering in partnership with the Safety Harbor Public Library. If you don't already know who I am, my name is Carla Berry. I live in Safety Harbor, Florida, and I have been working in the test prep, college applications, personal statement world for over a decade. So I help students perfect their scores on standardized tests like the SAT and the ACT. And I also help them prepare their applications for college. So today we're going to be looking in depth, what do you need to do to get your applications all filled out and the do's and don'ts of the personal statement. So to get to know you guys a little bit better today, I'm going to launch a quick poll. And if you, or actually a quick survey, let me see. Why is this not launching? It's not launching from my end. Oh goodness. Okay, so since it will not launch from my end, I'm having technical difficulties. If you can just put in the chat if you are applying to college this fall or at some point in the future, so your graduation here. And also if you have already started filling out the Common App. If you don't know what the Common App is, please just put that in the chat. And that way I can get to know a little bit better where you guys are currently at, so I can tailor today's workshop to you. Okay, so we're going to be using a handout that I did link in the email that I sent. And it's a navigating applications handout. And that's where we're going to start today. So the college application process can be pretty overwhelming for students, especially if it's the first time that they're applying to college. Or if they don't have an older sibling that's close in age that they can kind of piggyback off of as far as what to do to get ready. So let's just start right at the beginning. What do you have to have handy? What should you have ready as you are starting the application process? So most schools use the Common App, or you may be applying to college directly through that university's website. But before you start the application process, you can make your whole experience that much more pleasant by just having certain information available. So I want you to go and just get all your biographical information. So that's going to be, where did your parents go to college? And I know there may biographical be some parents in this workshop today, but I'm just going to address you as if you're the student. So you would need your parents' college information, when they graduated, what degree they had, where they studied, any siblings information, half siblings, step parents, those are all included in your biographical information. You also need your GPA and class rank. And that information, I usually have students go to their guidance counselor for, especially the class rank information. That can be a little bit tricky to fill out in the Common App. So just ask your guidance counselor what your class rank is and how that is assessed. You also will need your courses. This includes all of your courses. So any course that you took during high school, whether it was at your high school through dual enrollment, over the summer, the AP through Florida Virtual School, any course that you took, you're going to need, and you're going to need your grade for that course too. Sometimes you will only be inputting that information after you submit an application. A university will send you a link where you fill that all out. Other times you'll be inputting that information straight into the Common App, and it can be quite tedious, and it just makes life a little bit easier if you have that information available to yourself. All of your courses may just show up on your transcript, so it's helpful to have your transcript. And one of the questions I had in that survey that I cannot launch was if anyone is going to be applying to test optional schools. So just raise your hand if that is you, if you're planning on applying test optional. Anyone applying test optional. So I see one hand. If you are planning to apply to some test optional schools, make sure that you request your transcript from your school before you apply and just look at it. Some schools will publish test scores that they have available for you. So let's say you took the SAT or the ACT at school through your school. They'll have that information and they'll actually publish that on your transcript, which can be unfortunate if you are applying to a school that is test optional and you're applying as test optional, and now you're giving them your test score unintentionally. So make sure that you know what actually appears on your transcript if that's the case. You're also going to need your activities. These are all activities after the summer, after 8th grade. So summer after 8th grade and beyond. I frequently have parents or students ask me, well, the student won the 8th grade spelling bee, maybe on a national level, or they had some big accomplishment in middle school. They went to Duke Tips or they did something, and it just does not count for your college application. So the summer after 8th grade and beyond counts as high school. If it is an activity that you only participated in the summer after 8th grade, or you only participated in it during 9th grade, I would have that at the very bottom of your activities list. So I wouldn't list that first, but it can still be in there. And then lastly, you're going to need your honors. Any honors that you've received. So I'm going to highlight two things here. We're going to highlight your class rank and your honors. Those are two things that your guidance counselor can really help you with. Sometimes students think, well, I don't have any academic honors, or I don't have any honors. And that is actually rarely the case. I do see that every now and then where a student genuinely doesn't have any honors. And if that's you, you'll be okay. It's not the end of the world. But often students were on the provost honor roll or the dean's list, and that counts as an honor. Or they achieved a certain score on X number of APs and they're qualifying as an AP scholar, and that qualifies them as an honor for the honor section. Let me think of some other honors. I had a student that I met with one-on-one, and he said, well, I don't have any honors, but he was wearing his Boy Scout uniform and he had all these badges, and each one of those were pretty much an honor of something that he achieved. He was on his way to become an Eagle Scout, and that was an honor, but he had convinced himself that he didn't have any honors. So make sure that you reach out to your guidance counselor if you're unsure of honors that you may have, to see if there's something that maybe qualifies as an honor that you're just not recognizing. Usually something pops up. You can also talk to your parents or a guardian, grandparent, somebody that's active in your life that may know of an honor that you just don't think of immediately. Let me see here. I think I had, give me 1 second. I'm going to pull up a quick little document here. I know some of you, how many of you, raise of hands, are more visual? Do I have some visual learners here with me today? I am more visual for sure. So I'm just going to pull up a quick document here to show you some honors. So I like for students to organize their honors specifically in a Google Doc, the same for activities. Before you input it into the Common App. That way it's easier to check for spelling or grammar errors. It's easier to check for the character count so that it's short enough to actually fit into the space on the Common App. And it also helps you in case you lose what you inputted in there for whatever reason, or it gets changed somehow. It just gives you a backup. So here I just have a standard honors Common App document. And you would just indicate your number of honors. And then here we have some common honors. Like I mentioned, the Dean's List, Honor Roll, National Honor Society. Let me make this a little bit bigger. AP Scholar Awards, Boy Scouts, swimming and diving teams sometimes have Bars and Letters Awards or other awards. Other sports teams will have awards if you make a certain GPA while you're active in the sport. And let's check out those AP Scholar awards quickly here. So you get an AP Scholar as an honor if you received a 3 or higher on 3 or more AP exams. An AP Scholar with honors is 3.25 average on 3 or higher, and 3 or higher on 4 or more of these exams. So 3.25 average on all AP exams and 3 or higher on 4 or more. And then AP Scholar with distinction. And then there's the AP International Diploma. So just check if you qualify for one of those. If you don't, it's not a big deal, but you don't want to miss an honor that you have. That's the biggest thing that I want you to watch out for. As you're organizing your activities, let me just pull up a quick activities document here too for the visual learners. Okay, so let's think about common activities. So common activities would be sports, right? School-sponsored activities. If you're in a certain sport, if you participate in the marching band or theater or school-sponsored clubs, if you work at Panera or Chick-fil-A, or you babysit for friends and family, or you tutor younger siblings, internships, paid and unpaid, community service, if you're working towards those bright futures hours and you volunteer somewhere, those are going to be really common activities that students can list. But there are also some activities that are not school sponsored that you can still list. So let's say you practice piano weekly, even though you don't take formal lessons anymore and you don't play piano at school, but you play piano at home every day or once a week. Your parents are like, remember to practice the piano. You can list that as an activity. If you help an elderly relatively regularly, you can list that as an activity. I had a student last year who fished. So the student went fishing every week, and that was an activity. I had another student who went paddle boarding pretty frequently throughout the year, and that was an activity. But those were not school-sponsored activities. They were recreational activities. One student in particular, I think, only had 1 or 2 school-sponsored activities. His application looked pretty weak until we really investigated what is he doing all of his free time. I remember asking him, well, do you play a lot of video games? What are you doing with your time? As far as what you've just told me here, it looks like you go to one club for 30 minutes once a month and you go to school, and that's it. And as we talked a little bit longer, it turned out he actually had a ton of things outside of school that he was interested in that just were not school-sponsored activities that he could put on his application. Okay, let's go back in here. And would it be helpful for you guys? I don't have this stuff linked in the email that I sent out, but would it be helpful for you to have access to these documents? Just raise of hands. If I see a couple of hands, I'll link it in the follow-up email. Okay, so I'll link these just so you can read it through on your own too. So activities that have a higher priority. So this is once you're actually adding those activities to the Common App. And I'm talking kind of fast today because there's so much for us to cover in this hour, and I'm going to do my best not to go over time. So if at any point I'm going over something really quickly and you find your head is spinning and you want me to just take a couple steps back and say it again more slowly or in a different way, just send me a message in the chat box or in the Q&A feature and I'll circle on back. But I want to try to just jam pack as much information into this hour as possible. Okay, so once you have your list of activities ready to go, so you've gathered all your documents, you want to put in how many hours a week you were engaged in that activity and how many weeks out of the year you participated in that activity. Also, if you had any kind of responsibility for that activity. So if you had a leadership position within that activity, you'll want to specify that. And if you were involved in an activity and you had a leadership position, or maybe you founded a club, you were participating in that activity all throughout high school, so 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade, or especially in 11th and 12th grade, and you spent a considerable amount of time in that activity, you're going to want to list those activities first. So I recently heard someone say that for activities in the Common App, you should group similar activities together. I'm going to lower everyone's hands if it lets me. And it's not letting me. Weird. Zoom is just not my friend today. Oh, there we go. Lower all hands. Has anyone heard of grouping similar activities together in the Common App? You see like one hand there. So I don't generally do that. I like putting just your most important activity first and then showing kind of diversity in your application for your first 3 activities. So let's say you volunteer, so have significant volunteer hours. That would be your first activity, then a sport, then your job or a club that maybe you're involved in. And then you can start listing the less important activities after that. But I would not say if, let's say you're a soccer player and you play club soccer and school soccer and all different kinds of soccer, that your first 5 activities are just soccer, 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 and then you talk about the other things. I would want you to show that you're pretty well-rounded in your activities when you list those. Let's see, let's go through a couple of FAQ here. I'm going to open it up to some questions at the end of today's session too, but I do want to cover a couple of FAQs as we go through, just in case it's a question you were thinking of asking. So common one I get is, what if you have more than 10 activities? So there is only room for 10 activities within the Common App. So sadly, sometimes I have students that were super involved in school and they have more than 10 activities and they want to shed a tier or 2 when they find out they can only list 10. So you're going to have to pick your 10 most important, most powerful activities to list. Some schools will allow you to submit a resume. So if they allow that, you can list the rest of your activities in your resume. What if you don't have 10 activities? Like I mentioned earlier, I met with a student last year that had very few activities, and most of his activities ended up being things that you would not think traditionally qualify as activities, and they still do. So get creative, think about what you're spending your time on, and if you can present that in a way that is meaningful. Okay, let's see here. I'm going to just take a check at some of the questions I have so far. So some of you don't know what the Common App is yet. Some of you have already completed the Common App, but it looks like most of you don't know what the Common App is. Okay, so that's cool. Let me actually pull up the Common App then. I'm just going to log in really quickly into a tester account, and then I'm going to share my screen here after I'm logged in. So this is just at thecommonapp.org. And let's see here. So I haven't logged into this one in a while, so this is good. So I'm on commonapp.org and I just logged into my account. If you start a new account, they'll also ask you this. So you could already start an account if you're a junior and you're going to be applying next year. If you're a senior, you would just say, I'm applying as a first-year student and plan to start college in 2021 or 2022. So we're just going to go with that one for today. And I'm going to just start fresh. So I'm not going to keep any of the universities I have in there. I'm going to say I'm at Berkeley Prep. No, I'm not in the EU. The Common App may share my contact information. They may communicate with me, and I am agreeing to their privacy. So now I'm in. And the nice thing is that your information actually rolls over from one year to the next. So that is really convenient. So let's say you're a junior, but you only really want to start with this next summer, then you can start filling out your Common App. And on August 1st, when a new Common App is released, your information theoretically should roll over. But remember, I want you guys to be working in Google Docs or in Word on your computer. So you have a backup of all that information. You're not losing it. Okay, so here we can go to college search. And I'm just going to put University of Florida. and search for that. And then when I press the plus sign here, it's going to add it to my university list. Does anyone have another university they'd like me to add just as a tester? I'm gonna look in the chat to see if anyone, okay, let's see if Full Sail is on here. So Full Sail, nope. Okay, let's see UNC. So University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. USF recently started using this, so that's nice. University of South Florida, Johns Hopkins. So sometimes schools may not show up on the Common App, and if they don't, you may need to apply to that school directly, or they may use the Coalition app. So I'm just gonna go search for the Coalition app, and I misspelled it, and that's okay. So this is like the Common App, but not as many schools use it. It's not as frequent, so I'm not gonna touch on the Coalition app today. We're just gonna look at the Common App, but you may need to go and check the Coalition app. So once you have your universities added, you're going to go back to the dashboard here, and you're going to add your term. So I'm going to say my preferred start term is in the fall, but you could pick a different term. Sometimes it's easier to get into a summer term start than a fall term start. So if you think that you don't quite meet the requirements for a university, you could try to put a summer term start in there. You also have to put if you're applying for need-based financial aid. So I'm just going to say yes there. And then we're going to go back to our dashboard. Oops, why did it add it? I didn't, whoops. Where did it go? Okay, here we go. So University of Florida, November 1st, 2021, that is the due date for this application. So that updates in there, which is really nice. And for UF, if we go to the questions, they ask a bunch of questions here that are pretty easy to answer, just about your academics, your family. These are pretty easy questions, but then they have some sneaky questions in here. They call them important questions, which are more mini essay answer questions. So make sure for each school, as you add them in, to see, do they have any supplemental questions that are essay answers that you have to work on? If we look at, let's do Johns Hopkins. Ooh, here we have an option, early decision versus regular decision. Does anyone not know what early decision means? Okay, so I see a couple don't know. So early decision is a binding agreement. If you apply early decision, you are committing to that school if they accept you, regardless of the type of financial aid that they offer to you. If you apply early action, you will get an offer of admission earlier. So you'll hear back earlier from the school, but you are not committing to attending that school. So remember, early decision is binding. So we're just going to go regular decision here. And then, oh, test optional is an option here. So you can see UF did not have this option, but Johns Hopkins does. So let's say I do not want my test scores to be submitted. Do you have any fee waivers? So these are application fee waivers. Some schools will offer those. It's a good idea to just check your email to see if maybe they sent you a fee waiver. Or do you see right here, the Johns Hopkins fee waiver? If the application fee presents a financial hardship for you, you can email the university directly and let them know your situation. They may request additional information, and then they will send you a fee waiver so that you can apply for free. College applications can get expensive for all the fees. So do you intend to pursue need-based financial aid? Let's say no here. And I'm just randomly picking answers. And I'm going to say no to that one. And then you can see they ask more questions, and then more, and then family. And then they have it separate here, a writing supplement. So they have a 400-word essay that they're asking for right there. So make sure that you're really clicking through for each university. You're looking at what they want. So those are going to be university-specific questions. What I mentioned at the beginning of our session today, when I talked about the activities and the honors, those are going to be shared in your Common App with all of the universities. So as you go through and you fill out this part, this is going to be shared with everyone. So we have the profile, that's just going to be your biographical information, the information about your family members. Like I mentioned earlier, it's helpful to have that handy. Your own educational background. So if you went to more than one high school, you'll want to put that in here. If you did dual enrollment, you'll put that in here. Your current courses. So this one is important because if you happen to make a change, so this is, I really want everyone to pay attention here. Let's say you're a senior and you fill this out for both your fall and your spring courses, and then there is a change. You need to email each university and update them about that change if you've already submitted your application, so that the information they have is the most accurate. It would be very frowned upon and they may rescind your admission. So they may revoke an offer of admission if you list a course here and then your final transcript gets sent in and it doesn't match up. So be really careful with making changes to your courses after you submit your application. You'll need to update the universities, and I would be very careful of dropping down in difficulty of courses. So let's say you're in calculus and then you decide, you know what, I don't need this calculus to graduate. I already have enough math credits and this class is really hard and I'm a senior and I would rather take yoga or painting or something else, take an elective, and then you drop down. That is not wise for the college application process. So just be careful with that. Then we have our testing information. So also pay attention here if you're going to be applying test optional. So whatever information you put in here, so let's say I put in my SAT score right here, and I want to report one test. It's going to be shared with all the schools when I submit my application. But and this gets kind of confusing, so just pay attention. You submit these applications one at a time. So it's not that you add all these universities here and then you hit submit and it just sends your application to all the universities at the same time. Doesn't work that way. You would go and fill out the information one by one, and then you just submit Johns Hopkins University, that application, and you just submit USF's application, and then you're done. So if you're applying test optional, you need to go in and remove your testing information from the Common App before you submit your application to test optional schools. Does that make sense to everyone? You want to kind of go back and edit it. Let's see, just by raise of hands. So if you are applying to university and you don't want them to see certain information, you need to go and take it out, and that would be testing information. This is also where you are going to enter your activities. So once you have your activities in here, and I think I have 2 activities or a couple in here. Once you have them in here, you can hit the preview button, and then you can see what it's going to look like for the university when they are reviewing your application. So you want to make sure that the order is the order that you want them in. So let's say I want Mu Alpha Theta first, which I wouldn't put first here because you can see swim team was a lot more important to the student. I would go here and I would hit the down button here, and that moves swim team down. But we don't want swim team down. We're going to move Mu Alpha Theta down so that swim team is at the top. So you just want to check the order there. The same for the honors. You're going to want to check your order. And then here is where we have our personal statement. So some of you have already started on your personal statement, and we'll look at that in a little bit, but that's where you put in your personal statement. And here you also have the option for an additional essay, another 650 words. So if you were, and you can also put here, yes, if you were impacted by COVID-19, and that's another separate response, a paragraph that you can write here. For this additional essay though, not all students will complete that. It's actually pretty rare for students to complete that. I can give you some examples of students that I've worked with in the past that needed to complete that essay. There was a student that had pediatric cancer that impacted their academic performance. So that was listed in that additional essay. There was a student who failed some courses during high school. That was a separate essay. A student that failed a whole grade that had to repeat it during high school. That was a separate essay. If you ever received a D or lower in a class, and that's on your transcript, or you had to do credit recovery for a course, I would encourage you to write an essay explaining the circumstances and what you learned from that experience in the separate essay. If you have family circumstances or other circumstances that you want to share with the university that's not elsewhere in your application, you can put that there. Something I want you to note though, if you have anything that you don't want out in the world for all of eternity, I would not put it in there. So sometimes there are mental illness or other very personal private health information that might have impacted a student's performance, but they don't necessarily want the school to know about it. So they would maybe choose to withhold that information. It really is a case-by-case decision. If you have information where you're like, should I write an additional essay about this? Feel free to email me and I will give you my opinion if you're on the fence about something like that. Okay, so we have the additional information question there. You can also put there, remember earlier I mentioned the Eagle Scout. They were going to become an Eagle Scout, but they hadn't had that final ceremony yet. So that student could just put one sentence here, anticipating to become an Eagle Scout on X date, that you could put right there. If you have other information that maybe didn't fit into the application, let's say you were invited to an international conference or this big performance overseas for band that was canceled because of COVID, you could put that in there as just something you want to share that maybe didn't fit in anywhere else. There was a student that I had recently that was going to do a summer research program with Moffitt, and that was canceled because of COVID and it was postponed. So that was mentioned or could have been mentioned in that section. Okay, let's go back to the dashboard here. So as you add the different terms, you'll see the deadlines here for the applications. Let's just go on UF. You can see here just basic information. So the application deadlines, the application fees here, $30, standardized test policy always required. They require a final report as do all schools, so your final transcript. And they do not require teacher evaluations. So some schools will require it, some schools will not. They do not require that. If we go to Johns Hopkins, I'm pretty sure they would require evaluation. So let's see here. So they require 2 teacher evaluations and a counselor recommendation. So make sure if you haven't asked your teachers for recommendations yet, that you're going to do so. Okay, I'm going to go back to my other document here for you guys. Okay, so we're halfway through the workshop and we've touched on just application forms. We're making progress here. So make sure that you know the deadlines to every university that you're applying to and that you're organizing that information somewhere. Where did my pencil go here? Oh, there we go. Okay. Test scores, SAT versus ACT. I am yet to hear about a university that only accepts one of those. If a school accepts the SAT, they're going to accept the ACT and vice versa. It is personal preference which one you're going to use. As of this year, no school that I know of requires SAT subject tests. So yay, you don't have to take those. And then of course, some schools do allow you to apply test optional. Test optional means that you can either share your SAT and ACT or ACT score, or you can choose to withhold those, and theoretically, it should not impact your application. However, if you have a really good SAT score, ACT score, it would be silly not to share it at a test optional school. Especially, and let's just pay attention to this because it gets so confusing. Ever since schools became test optional, I think it really increased the complexity of college applications. So there are test optional schools and test blind schools. If the school is test optional, sometimes they will be test optional for admissions, but then they will require test scores for scholarships. So of course, most students do want scholarships. Raise of hands, how many of you would like a scholarship to school, right? Like most of us would like a scholarship. So that's not totally fair if they say, well, you can get in without a test score, but then you need a test score for a scholarship. Some schools though are test blind, which means that even if you have a test score, they're not going to look at it. And for those schools, they're going to be test blind for the admissions process and for scholarships. So that's really nice if you're applying to a school that's just test blind for everything. Of course, if you're applying test optional or test blind, there's going to be that much more weight on your GPA and on your essay and extracurriculars, because you're not going to have those test scores to also show your competency. Submitting scores to schools. So this one, I also want you guys to really pay attention to. So sometimes students enter their test scores into the Common App and they're like, well, I'm done. I reported my test scores. But you did not. You actually have to go on the College Board's website if you took the SAT, or the ACT's website if you took the ACT, and individually request that your scores be sent to the schools where you applied to, and you pay a fee for those scores to be sent. Sometimes when you're signing up for the SAT, you may select that your scores automatically be sent to those schools before you even know how you scored. I generally advise students not to do that unless they're 100% sure it's the final time that they're taking the SAT. Because what if you just didn't do that well and you don't want schools to have that score? So I generally advise against the free sends when you're just signing up for the SAT, unless you really need the free sends or you're sure that's the only time that you're going to be taking the test. But remember, you have to go and submit those scores outside of the Common App, not just within the Common App. You actually have to log into your College Board account, log into the ACT's website, and request that your scores be sent. Okay, so application fees can be $0 to $80+ depending on where you apply to. A lot of schools will send fee waivers via email if you meet, or well, mainly if you exceed whatever their requirements are. So Stetson here in Florida often sends fee waivers to students who did well on the SAT because they just want students with higher test scores to apply to their school so that they can increase their ranking gradually. It's in the school's best interest to have as many students as possible apply because they're collecting more application fees, and they sometimes are able to boost their rankings in that way. Let's see here. Daniela asks, if I already sent scores with the free offered via the SAT, do I also need to send it to additional schools that I'm applying to? Yes. So every school that you apply to needs to be sent those scores. So if you already sent it to 4 schools, but you're applying to 6 schools, then you need to go back in and send it to the 2 additional schools. So that does not automatically happen. Okay, transcripts. This is where your guidance counselor comes in. You need to ask your guidance counselor to share your transcript with the schools where you're going to be applying to. You're going to have a mid-year transcript. So first semester senior year grades are really important. You have to buckle down and make sure that you do well, because they're going to see how you did your first semester. And that transcript gets sent to every single school that you've applied to, that mid-year transcript from your guidance counselor. You also have your final transcript. So that is after you are done applying, you've accepted an offer of admission somewhere. The final step is to send them your final transcript, and they're just going to make sure that you didn't fail any classes. And like I said earlier, that the classes that you actually took match the classes that you listed on your application. Okay, let's see here. We're going to look at letters of recommendation. Whom should you ask? When should you ask? I like asking 2 to 3 teachers. So we're going to say 2 to 3. And generally teachers are good people to ask. Sometimes you can also ask coaches or some kind of mentor that you have through extracurricular like community service, but mainly teachers. And teachers that you had in 11th and 12th grade are going to be better than teachers that you had, let's say, in 9th grade. But if you had a 9th grade teacher that you took for an honors class, and that teacher had a significant impact on you, and you did really well in that class, and you really want to use that teacher, I'm not going to say a strong no. I would say if you really have no other option, go for it. Especially with students switching to virtual school, I've noticed that some of them have had difficulty forming relationships with teachers through the virtual platform where they feel comfortable asking for recommendations. So if that's really your only option, it's okay. But in general, we want 11th and 12th grade teachers that you took for strong academic classes. So let's say you are applying to be a biology major at UF. It would be better to ask a biology teacher for a for UF, you don't need a recommendation letter. So I'm going to backtrack here. Let's say you're applying as a biology major at Johns Hopkins. You're going to want to ask your biology teacher for a recommendation. When should you ask? Generally, we want to ask the spring of our junior year, but you could also ask later on. It's not the end of the world if you ask now. I will say asking in September is a lot better than asking at the end of October, right before a lot of applications are due. So if you are a senior and you have not asked your teachers for recommendations yet, please do so now. If you are in 11th grade, make a note of who you're going to ask in the spring. It's helpful to ask before the end of 11th grade because sometimes teachers leave a school, and if you ask them in the spring, you can get their contact information so that they can still write you a letter of recommendation, even if they're no longer at your school. So usually you need 1 to 2 recommendation letters. I like asking for more recommendation letters than the student needs, just in case a teacher doesn't come through and doesn't write the recommendation letter. They get overwhelmed with school projects, or they have something happen in their personal life where they just can't write you that letter of recommendation by the due date. So that just gives you a little bit of wiggle room. And then what are 2 things you should always give to your recommenders? You want to give them your resume or some kind of documentation of what you've been up to outside of their class. And then you also always want to thank them either with a thank you note or just an email or an in-person thank you, just to say thank you after you got into the school where you wanted to go, for them writing that letter of recommendation. Sometimes when you get to college, you'll be applying for a position within a club or an internship, and you're going to need another letter of recommendation, but you won't know any of your professors well enough yet to ask for that recommendation letter. So you want to make sure that you have a good relationship with those high school recommenders so that if you need another recommendation letter from them, you weren't the student that just asked for the recommendation letter and then never spoke to them again. It's so nice for them to get that thank you and also to be updated about your application process. Where did you actually end up going. So as far as recommendation letters, it's your responsibility to add them through the Common App and to also double check to see if they submitted their recommendation. Okay, let's see here. Somebody asked, do scholarships need recommendation letters? Sometimes they do. Not a lot of them, but sometimes they do. So as far as scholarships, let's see, do I have scholarships on my list here? Don't have it specifically, but let's go down and just talk about scholarships real quickly here. And I do think I'm going to go a little bit over time today. So if you have to leave at 1 p.m., that's okay. The session today is recorded. I just double checked that it's recorded. So I can provide a link to the recording to you if you need to watch whatever you missed. Okay. We'll come back to essays in a second, but financial aid. So sometimes there are recommenders for scholarships, not often, but sometimes it's possible. Sometimes you need to write separate essays for scholarships. So there are two types of scholarships or aid. There's need-based financial aid and merit-based financial aid. Need-based financial aid, and I'm just going to write it here. So need-based and merit-based. Need-based is usually automatic consideration just based on your family's finances. Merit-based is usually also automatic consideration, but based on your academic performance, and it does not take into account your family's financial status. So if you are applying, let's say, to Johns Hopkins or Harvard or Princeton, you're not generally going to be getting merit-based awards because students that apply to those universities have really strong academics, really strong GPAs and test scores. So it's going to be really difficult to say one student is more deserving than another based on merit-based criteria. Need-based, though, differs a little bit. That's just going to be, like I said previously, based on your family's financial status. So how does colleges determine whether you qualify for need-based financial aid? They're going to use the FAFSA. And the FAFSA opens on October 1st, and it's just a good idea to fill that out pretty early on. This is going to be filled out by your parents or your guardians. We'll fill out the FAFSA for you. And another question I get really often is from families who strongly believe they're not going to qualify for any need-based financial aid. So they're like, do I still have to fill out the FAFSA? And unfortunately you do, because often universities won't give any scholarships or financial aid whatsoever, whether it be need-based or not need-based, unless they have that FAFSA information. They just kind of hold that financial aid package hostage until they get that FAFSA info. There's also the Florida financial aid application, and that is for Bright Futures. So let's say you have everything in line to qualify for Bright Futures. You have the volunteer hours and the GPA and the test scores. It's not automatic. You actually have to go on the Florida financial aid application website and fill it out and apply for Bright Futures. It's not an automatic thing. Okay, lingo you should know. We already went over early action versus early decision. Remember, early action is just like the name. You're applying early. You're getting that offer of admission or rejection or waitlist early. Early decision is binding. This is a legal contract that you're entering saying, I'm going to go to this school regardless of what kind of scholarship they offer to me. There's also the candidate's reply date agreement. So once you get that offer of admission, you're either going to want to reject it or accept it. So now the ball is back into your court. There's a really tragic story of a student several years back that got into his dream school and he never accepted the offer of admission by the date that was on that offer of admission, and he lost his spot at that university. So make sure that you actually respond, you accept it. And if you don't want to go to that university, it's good form to reject it and maybe send them an email thanking them for the offer of admission and then just declining it, because that opens up spots on the wait list for other students. Do we have any questions about the rest of these? Let's see, class rank, we kind of went over again before. You're just going to ask your guidance counselor about that. The coalition application you're going to use if the university that you're applying to is not on the Common App or you can't apply to them directly. There's the FERPA waiver. This just waives your right to see what your recommender said about you. And if you need recommendation letters, I highly recommend that you waive FERPA. So you're going to want to do that. And just ask recommenders that you are pretty confident will write some positive recommendation letters for you. Don't ask someone if you don't actually know them well enough for them to recommend you. I like for students when they're asking for the recommendation letter to kind of phrase it in a way, either in person or in an email. Would you feel comfortable writing a positive letter of recommendation for me? Or would you be willing to write a positive letter of recommendation? There's a priority date or deadline. So some universities will have 2 deadlines. From the top of my head, I think University of Miami falls into this category. Let's go University of Miami. I haven't checked it. For this here, I'm gonna just add, I'm just gonna say college information. Yeah, so I think you really have to dig for this information. I'm gonna just share my screen here. Pretty sure it doesn't even show up here, but you can see here they have a November 1st deadline and then a January 1st deadline. And I'm pretty sure, don't take my word for it, go do your own research, but I'm pretty sure that oh yeah, right here. That's what I was looking for. So I do know this. In order to be considered for our premier scholarships, you must apply by November 1st. That's a kind of a big deal, right? So let's say you only look at this up here and you're like, oh, I have until January 1st to apply. And then December rolls around and you read the fine print over here. And now you just missed out on being considered for those scholarships. I went to the University of Miami on a scholarship, and that would have been pretty sad if I didn't get that scholarship money just because of when I submitted my application. Okay, let's go back here. And look at rolling admission. So for some universities, they'll have rolling admission. They'll send out offers of admission as they get the applications in. Other universities like UF wait until they have all the applications, and then on one day in the spring, they release decisions to everyone. It's just like big UF decision day. SAT subject tests, like I said earlier, don't really matter anymore. And then there's the waiting list. So sometimes a school will neither accept you nor reject you, but they'll put you on the wait list. So if you're put on the wait list, they will wait to see if their first choice candidates accept the offer of admission. And if one of them does not, then a waitlist spot opens up and you may be able to get in off of the waitlist. If you are put on the waitlist, sometimes they will give you the opportunity to submit additional information or write another essay specific to them, telling them why you deserve to be taken off of the waitlist. So just be really careful with all of that. By a raise of hands, how many of you feel pretty overwhelmed by all this information? This is a lot, right, to keep track of. I think this is a lot. I mean, it feels like a lot to me, and I do this every day. So one thing I use, and I was figuring out how I could efficiently share this with everyone, and I haven't figured out yet, but if this is something you want, just send me an email and I'll figure out if there's an easy way to get it to you. Let's see here. So I like students to use an application pro tracker, just put their basic information in here, organize their login information just in one document, and then list where they want to go to school, where they're going to be applying to. So we have, I'm going to zoom in here a little bit. We have the college name, the major or the program they're applying to, the application deadline, if they've submitted it, if they've been accepted, waitlisted, rejected, any scholarship deadlines, if they attended any virtual info sessions or the university, then the login for the portal. So this is another really important point I want to make today. After you submit an application via the Common App, your time with the Common App ends after you've submitted your applications. You do not log in back into the Common App to check the status of your application. You will be sent from each university an individual login, and then it's your responsibility pretty much on a weekly basis to be logging into your account on that university and to see if they're requesting additional documents and to see their admission decision often will just be posted right on their website. So sometimes they don't receive the transcript from your guidance counselor, and you'll see that when you log in, they haven't received the transcript, and then it's your responsibility to remind your guidance counselor to send that document. And then it's your responsibility to check again later in that week or the next week to see if that has been updated on the university's end that they received it. So it's extremely important whether you use this tracker or some other method to keep track of what your logins are for those portals and if they're requesting any information. I like just putting here if you completed your supplemental essays or if there are any, if you submitted your score to that school, if you submitted your transcript, if there are any letters of recommendation or a counselor recommendation letter required, if they have submitted those rec letters. If they have not submitted them, you may need to remind them. Some schools require the SSAR, so that's going to be your self-reported student academic record, and you're just going to list all the classes that you took during high school and all the grades, and you'll get an individual invite for that if the school requires it, or they will tell you if they do. If the school requests information, I like putting it in here. If you correspond with the school via email, I like just keeping tabs of it on here. So let's say, let's make the date 10/2/2021, UF emailed to ask about Innovation Academy. And then you could say 10/5/2021, sent UF transcript. Like you can just keep track of it here so that the next week when you're logging into your account and you're checking things, you can make sure that you just stay up to date with everything. Then of course, the cost of attendance, how much is it actually going to cost to go to that school? Your expected family contribution. So after you're accepted, they'll give you scholarship awards and how much they expect you to pay out of pocket. And then you can double check that your final report card was sent. So it's really important to just organize this somewhere. And I think at least for those of you joining live, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this really quickly just during the workshop, because that's going to be the easiest for me to just do it during the workshop. So I'm going to call this Application Pro Tracker Workshop Students. And I'm going to make it, doing this live because it's just easier to do it live and to tell you how it works. I'm going to make this document read only. I'm going to show you what you're going to do when you get it. So anyone with the link can view this document. So let's see here. So you're going to get access to this document, and I'm just going to put it here in the chat box. Where's my chat box? There we go. So you should see it in the chat box. So you can view this document. And then if you want to make this document your own, you're going to go up to File, and then you're going to say Make a Copy. And then it's going to become your own document that you can edit. Okay, so you're just going to go File, Make a Copy. and then you can edit it. But you'll have access to this document then. Okay, so you're going to organize your applications. And then for the personal statement, I like students to start here. So brainstorm 10 topics that you could possibly write on. And then I want to have you brainstorm 10 things that are important to you. So each one of these is a drop-down menu. So responsibility, creativity, knowledge, inclusion, curiosity, gratitude. So let's just pick 10 things. So let's say creativity is important to me, responsibility, I'm going to say excellence, independence. I'm just randomly picking ones here. This is not things that I think are more important than other things. Boom. I'll pick a couple more here. Okay, so once you have the things that are important to you here, you may notice a pattern or that certain things group together. And I want you to pick a personal statement where you can actually show how these qualities are important to you. I'm sure you guys have heard of show, don't tell. So let's say that curiosity is super important to me, and excellence and communication, and responsibility. And then I write about a particular science experiment that I worked with others, communicated really clearly to investigate. So that shows curiosity, something important. And then I took responsibility for a certain aspect. So you can kind of demonstrate the different things. Then I also like for students to ask other people how they would describe them. So ask your parent or your guardian or your grandparent, teachers, friends, a coach, how would they describe you? And make sure that when you look at your final personal statement, that your true essence comes across. So these admissions officers don't have the opportunity to meet you and get to know you. That personal statement is one shot for them to really get to know you. So you want to be as transparent as possible and as true to yourself with whatever you write about. You want to get vulnerable with it. So let's see here. I'm going to just share the other document. I'm going to try to wrap up within the next 10 to 15 minutes. And then we'll be good to go. Okay. So the personal statement, picking a topic. When you are picking a topic, I want you to consider the things that I have on the list here, but I also want you to think of something that is not listed elsewhere in your application. So a lot of times, let's say a student is an athlete, they'll be advised against writing about whatever athletic endeavor they're involved in their personal statement. But that can be tough. Like, let's say you're a gymnast or a swimmer or something where you're spending a ton of time every day on that activity. You can still, in my opinion, write about it for your personal statement, but you need to reveal information that is beyond what is listed elsewhere in your application. So let's say you're a swimmer. I want you to write about a particular moment or experience that you had on the swim team, instead of just writing an essay about all of your achievements on the swim team. I hope that makes sense to everyone. You can also write about community service or a personal life circumstance, non-academic interests that you have, but I want you to make sure that it does give them insight into who you are as a person. I don't think there's a right topic or a wrong topic. However, I would advise you against writing about dark subject matter or information that does not put you in the best of light. So as you're being transparent after you read your first draft, make sure that you're not being too self-deprecating or putting yourself down in that personal statement. You want to present yourself in the best possible light. So after you have your list of topics, I like for students to write on at least 3 of those topics to begin with. So set a timer for an hour and just see what you can come up with. Often when students do that exercise, they see that there might have been a topic that they were really excited to write about, but they just couldn't write about it. So it just rules that topic out automatically. Or there's a topic on there that maybe they weren't too excited to write about initially, but once they started writing, the essay just came alive and they're like, oh, this is perfect. I'm just going to write on this topic. So write those drafts, make sure that even if you choose not to use one of the drafts that you wrote initially, that you don't delete it forever, you save it somewhere, because you guys saw all those supplemental essay questions. Sometimes you can use what you wrote for a personal statement draft that you didn't end up using to answer or help answer one of those supplemental essay questions. Make sure that you're very honest with your personal statement. So I don't want you to lie in there. I'll never forget. It was probably, I'd say, let's see here, it's 2021. It was probably like 10 years ago, maybe a little bit more, where I was teaching a class in person. And I vividly remember the one girl, and she was sitting in the front, and I had them write practice personal statements. And then we read them. And when I read hers, it was just the most moving personal statement ever. And it almost brought me to tears. It was just very powerful and moving. And I just said, oh my goodness, I can't believe like this experience that you had. And she chuckled to herself and she said, I can't believe it either. I made it all up. Was it a good essay? And you just can't do that. So you can't see this as a creative exercise. I do want you to be honest as you write. And I don't want you to try to just share everything. So don't try to share every experience, every topic. Really zoom in on one or two things and focus on that, and just really make sure that it is well written. I want you to be revising your essays multiple times, so not just once. Go read it through again and again. Okay, let's see here. Lucas asked, I'm not seeing the link that you sent for the essay. Could you resend it? I'm not sure what link you're talking about for the essay. I think maybe you're talking about the personal statement tracker here. So this is just, let me know if this is what you're talking about. This is just the third tab of the application pro tracker, is for personal statement brainstorming. Let me know if that's what you meant. And I'll see here in the chat if that's what you meant. Yep, yeah, it's just the third tab here. Okay, as we wrap up today's session, I'm gonna just look at your questions here really quickly to see what we have. Okay, let's see here. So I don't see any other questions, so that's great. Let's look at some personal statement examples. We'll do something fun at the end. And I'm not gonna look at the whole personal statements, but I do wanna look at parts of them here. I'm just gonna pull them up on my computer and we're gonna see it. And there's one here that I particularly wanted to share, and it's not on my list. I'm just going to pull it up really quickly again. And these personal statements were shared with permission from the students. I asked some students if I could share their personal statements just to give you guys an idea of how different personal statements can read. And you can kind of get an idea too of the different voice that you're gonna hear in these. Okay, let's see here. Okay, let's see here. We'll start with this one. Okay, so before we look at these, oh, and somebody asked, are you going to be emailing the spreadsheets? I sent them here as a link in the chat, but I can also link it. I just sent it again in the follow-up email so that you have it. Okay, so as we look at these essays in general for personal statements, I like the format of starting with an experience. So the first paragraph is just an event or experience. It's something that's meaningful, memorable, exciting. You're like gripping the reader. You start with that. And then the second paragraph kind of orients the reader and tells them what you're talking about. And it's easier to see what I'm talking about than for me to tell you. So let's just look at one here. So here, it is 2 a.m. and a flashlight shining directly into my eyes jars me from my slumber. The spectral figure behind the beam whispers silence. As my captor leads me down the stone path away from my cabin, I can feel the adrenaline surging in my veins and anticipation rising in my chest. In another setting, I would have immediately concluded I was about to be held for ransom. However, as a veteran of wind-shaped camps, I felt confident my stealthy abduction signaled an honor reserved for a select few. For 2 weeks every year since I was in 4th grade, I have attended Winship. So this is okay to put in here because the student continued going to this camp during high school. If this was only an experience that the student had in 4th grade, then they could not put, I would not recommend writing the personal statement on it. Each year, there is a tradition where the staff gathers to select 20 campers from over 100 eligible to compete for the title of Little Chief. I see some raised hands. If you have a question, just put it in the chat box for me. And then the student continues writing about all the different steps about that were involved for competing for the Little Chief title. And the essay ends with that they did not receive that title. So it shows everything that the student learned through the process of competing for that title. And this is just one example. Okay, let's look at another one here. And this student, if you're curious, ended up at UF in the honors program and also got into quite a few out-of-state programs that were really good. Let's see here. Other examples. This is another UF honor student. And this student wrote about being in the pool. So just the experience of the coach yelling at her, go, 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 as she's swimming. And then she says, it took years of effort to procure my coach's cheers. Unlike my teammates who had over a decade of swimming experience each, I only started to swim competitively as a freshman. While my teammates mastered swimming in meets prior to high school, I was riding the waves of my youth at the beach. And she talks about how she was pretty much the worst person on the team initially. So here in any sport, no one wants to be a bench warmer, but until I could show consistent improvement, I accepted that position. From that point on, I could find my name at the top of the list rather than at the bottom, and then what swimming taught her. So this puts swimming as an activity in context. If someone didn't read this about her, they wouldn't know that that was her experience on the swim team. Let's look at one more. So I showed you 2 examples so far of what I would consider traditionally good personal statement formats. But every now and then a student will go into left field and write something that I personally wouldn't come up with. But if you feel strongly about your essay, even though you may be pushing the boundaries a little bit with your essay, it's okay. You can do that. And let's just look at this personal statement. Where did it go? It keeps on not opening. There we go. Okay, so this I would say is a little bit more non-traditional. The student is definitely taking risks with this personal statement, but it's still a really good one. And the student got into UF and did pretty well. Okay, let's see here. So somebody was supposed to come and slap me before any of it went too far, before the allure of the unknown swallowed me whole, before I ended up scaling a wall and peeing my pants. When I was 14, I had this conviction that the universe would grab me by the scruff of the neck before I did anything wrong. It wasn't supposed to be my responsibility. Some cosmic shove was accountable, but I got carried away, seduced even by the temptation of the beyond represented by the wall. So this is a little bit more of a humorous personal statement, and it does show a lot of her personality. So as you come up with your own personal statement topic, I want you to really think about what is true to you. You can take all of my advice, but also take it with a grain of salt. If you want to try something new that is perfectly okay with me. So since we don't have time today to read each of these personal statements in detail, what I am going to do is I will add it to a Google Drive folder that has those honors documents and activities documents that we looked at in the beginning. And I'll give you access to them so you can read the personal statement examples through on your own. But I do want you to not try to recreate these personal statements. They've already seen the light of day out there in the application world. So really try to come up with your own topic, be true to yourself. Don't try to be someone else. And then the final point that I want to make when you're looking at personal statements online or the examples that I'm giving you, these personal statements are after many, many revisions. The initial draft that the students wrote generally don't look a whole lot like the final draft after they've gone back time and time again to see what is the most captivating part of the essay, and then moving that to the very top. What part of the essay doesn't really add much value to it, deleting those parts until you're right under the word count. So it really takes quite a few revisions, many, many hours of revisions until you really perfect the essay. So don't try to have your first draft look like someone else's final draft. Don't play that comparison game because it can be quite paralyzing if you try to do that. Okay, before we wrap up today, I'm going to just open it up to questions. So if you have any questions, just put it in the chat box there, and or in the Q&A feature, you can ask questions anonymously. So I'm going to just hang out here for a minute as I see any questions come in, and then I'll cover those questions and we'll wrap up for today. And I'm going to just get that folder. I'm going to see if I can get that folder ready for you guys really quickly, because if I can share the link to it right now while I wait for some questions. So I'm just going to give you guys a minute or two to see if you have any questions. And let's see here. And I got this all in here. Great. So I'm going to put this link in the chat, and I'll also share this link in the follow-up email. But in case you wanted now before the follow-up email goes out, you'll have that. Somebody asked, where can I find recordings for each workshop I've participated in? Most workshops are available on my YouTube account, but if there's a specific one that maybe is not on there, you can email me and I can see if I can find the recording. I'm going to just see if I can pull up my YouTube account here really quickly so that you guys can see it. Here we go. I'm going to just share my screen here. So if you look up Carla Berry Prep on YouTube, you can find some of my recordings on here. So a lot of past workshops are on here. So if we click on uploads, you can see a past SAT math strategies, reading, writing and language, calculator, no calculator, SAT bootcamp, ACT bootcamp. So you can find those all on there. And I think I have some other questions here too. Let's see here. AP test scores in general, I think that's just through the College Board. But some students may not, so AP test scores, it's kind of a tricky question. It depends how well you did on the AP test and also to which school you're sending it to. So let's say, we'll just take as an extreme example, you're applying to Harvard but you never scored higher than a 3 on an AP test, I probably would not share those 3s with Harvard. You could share on your transcript that you took the APs, but I wouldn't share those scores. If you receive a 4 or a 5 on the AP test, I think you would be good to share those with most Florida schools. Let's see here. Do you review completed personal essays and provide feedback for individuals if sent in an email? I do work with students one-on-one for that. If you're interested in that, just send me an email. My process for that in general is to provide feedback. Sometimes I help students with more intensive revision. And as a final part of the process, if you're working with me one-on-one for that, is I send the essay to a second reader to also review the essay and basically identify any weaknesses. To subscribe to the YouTube account, I think there is a subscribe button. If you click on one of the videos, it's not going to show up for me because I'm logged into my own account. There should be a subscribe button. Let's see here. And then we have some more questions. What other sessions do you have available? So if you go on my website, carlaberry.com, and I'm going to share my screen here. You can go to Safety Harbor Public Library if you just hover on the More button right there. And then you can see, so we're in the personal statement and applications workshop today. There's an SAT calculator math workshop that's coming up and an SAT reading workshop. And I probably will be adding more for the spring. I don't know how many more I will be adding this year. I will be sharing the links that I shared in the chat in the email, because there are students that will be joining via the recording that couldn't join live today. Let's see here. I'm a senior at Eastlake High School. If I get accepted into the USF summer semester, do you have any tips? I think it's fine to start over the summer. So one big thing, if you do have a spring start or a summer start at a university, is to map out whatever classes you're going to be needing to take for your major. Sometimes classes have prerequisites and the class is only offered in the fall or the spring. So it could throw off that schedule a little bit. If you, let's say, start in the spring, but the class you need to take first is not offered in the spring, it's only offered in the fall, it could put you behind a little bit. So I would just watch out for that when you start over the summer, to kind of map out, if you do know what you're going to be majoring in, go to an advisor and just map out kind of what classes you're going to be taking all 4 years, so that you can make sure that you have met the requirements for classes that you're going to need to be taking down the road for your major, and you don't have a delayed graduation because of that. Let me see if there's any other questions that I haven't gotten to. Okay, my email address, somebody asked for, it's just info@carlaberry.com. And you can go to my website too, and there's a box on my homepage where you can just submit an inquiry. I'll share that. So if you just go to carlaberry.com, you can request information here. So as we wrap up today, let's see, where are my course evaluations? Does it still show up here? Yes, program evaluation. So it would be great today if you guys, and I'm going to put this link in the chat box, could evaluate this workshop for me. I use your feedback when planning future workshops. So I'm going to put this in the chat right here, if it lets me, the link to this. So it's just carlaberry.com/evaluation. You can see it up there. And that enables me to plan future workshops a little bit better. So it asks, what aspects did you find most valuable? What would you like to see more of in the future? If you have any thoughts or comments about me, if you have any requests for future programs, how you heard about this program, and anything you've attended in the past. And if you could fill that out, I really appreciate it. And a lot of what I offer in partnership with the library is based on people that came before you that filled out the program evaluation and requested certain kinds of workshops and more of certain things. Let me see here. I think I answered all the questions. So we are good to go. I'm going to give you just a minute as you fill out the program evaluation. And you can also just go to carlaberry.com and then hover over more and then go to program evaluation right there and fill this out. You're welcome. I'm going to just hang out here for one more minute to see if any other questions pop up. And if no more questions pop up, we're just going to wrap it up for today. Remember that I am going to share a recording of this session and a follow-up email to you guys and all the program materials. You're welcome. I'm glad you guys were able to join live. Okay, don't see any more questions. And I'm going to let you all go. And I hope to see you for future workshops. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.